Okay, so this is week, excuse me, week 3 for integrated health and wellness. This is on stress. This part is on stress. There's 2 parts to the lecture today for this week: stress, and then the ACE study. First one's all about stress. So these are the lecture questions in class. To be answering these. These are good to get down and know that you know them well, because kind of clue you into what's going to be coming on the midterm exam and the final exam. All this stuff around stress, good stress, bad stress. Gets into the neurophysiology of the stress a little bit, gets a little bit involved, not too involved, but it gets all these different pathways around stress, how it affects health, all these different kinds of aspects of stress and health. Stress and health really go together. You'll see that pretty quickly as a therapist. People that have health issues, generally speaking, have stress issues because it causes all these changes in their lives, that sort of thing. The first question is what are 2 leading causes of stress in your life right now? Kind of think about that. I'm guessing for a lot of you, it's similar things, but what are 2 big causes of stress right now? If you feel like you have any stress, or maybe if you're not stressed at all right now, can you think of times in your life where you were stressed? What was kind of driving that? This is what AOTA says about stress in OT. So definitely something we can treat and have something to do with. The occupational therapy profession promotes the establishment of healthy habit patterns. It's kind of what we talked about last week. Familiar, predictable routines, again last week. And increased engagement in meaningful activities that serve as both protective and healing factors in combating the negative effects of stress. So this kind of jives what we were doing last week. The habits and the routines, they have a big driver around bad habits, health-related bad habits. They're also a good driver around health promoters and dealing with stress and getting more healthy and engaged in occupation. Occupational therapy practitioners develop evidence-based interventions based on this philosophy and conduct research to develop their efficacy for coping with stress. That's something we do as OTs, is help our patients cope with stress. What is stress? I think we kind of all know it when we feel it, but kind of trying to quantify it. Kind of any change you encounter, wear and tear on the body. I'll get into that today. The inability to cope with problems. I mean, we all have problems. When it gets to the point where you can't cope, you're overwhelmed, you get really stressed. Loss of emotional control. Some people might just find stress just by crying. I'm so stressed I have to cry. Absence of inner peace, for sure. Stress is a perceived threat, real or imagined, to our mind, body, spirit, or emotions. There's different kinds of stress. Kind of thinking about it broadly, there is definitely good stress. I think you all experience good stress. You feel that anxiety when a test is starting to come because you have to study, and that good stress forces you to study or forces you to do that paper so you can be successful and achieve the goals you want to achieve. So that can be a good stress. But it can be like a fine line between good and bad, or distress. You're so stressed that it's causing issues. We'll talk about that in a second. And then there's something different, a different category of stress, more toxic stress. The second part of the lecture today on the ACE study, we'll talk about toxic stress, childhood trauma. Hopefully none of you have experienced that. That can be very toxic in terms of lifelong health issues. And then there's kind of neutral stress. It's neither good nor bad. If you look at this little chart, stress, eustress is good stress, distress is bad stress. So stress can lead to optimizing your performance to a certain point, and then it leads to detrimental poor performance. Here's an example. Eustress stress gets you revved up for the test. You know it's a big test. A lot is at stake. So you study very hard. And the fact that you're studying hard and you're preparing, talking to your professor with your questions, you do well. But let's say you have test anxiety. You're so stressed that when you go in there to take the test, you can't think straight. You have a hard time focusing. You make mistakes. You don't do as well as you would have done if it was a less stressful kind of situation. So that's kind of where it gets distressed. You kind of lose performance. So it's a fine line between good and bad. Number of ways to look at stress that kind of blurs a little bit. But acute stress is more fight, flight, or freeze. You see that tiger and you run. Repeated incidents of acute stress have a cumulative effect. Well, that will be in the ACEs study. And there's that chronic stress. It's kind of like that toxic stress again. Children of people who've grown up in war zones. Racism can be very subtle, even perceived. You believing people are making judgments, racial judgments about you, can be very judgmental to your health over the long haul, as we'll see next week, I think. Poverty can be a big stressor. Lifelong poverty can really leave lifelong impacts on your health, well-being, health disparity, which kind of ties into poverty. Sources of stress, all kinds of different sources of stress these days more than ever. Physical stress, this is what we'll see a lot of with your patients. Illness, toxins, imbalances, dietary stress, psychological stress, fear, worry, shame, psychosocial stress, relationships, poor relationships or lack of relationships, psycho-spiritual stress. Sort of religion, but more like a crisis of values, lost meaning and purpose, not sure what you're doing, why you're doing, what's the meaning to all this, what's the meaning to life. People can have stresses over that, kind of spiritual or, I'm not sure of the word, existential kind of crisis kind of thing. Techno stress, I definitely experienced a lot of this around technology, all the little things we have to do with technology, how tedious it can be. Here's an example. Tuesday, I was home working, and because of the snow, and we had issues with our bank account. We're trying to get into it, and it was just the website was all funky. We couldn't work it. There was something wrong on the bank's end of it. They had to fix something. So you call to get help because you couldn't get help any other way. And then when you call, you're gonna have to go through like 3 different people, all these different answering. Hit this button, hit that button. And then we finally get the person that's supposed to help us, and they're in some foreign country, and she has a heavy accent, and the call is breaking up. So it's like every 20 seconds her voice disappears, it comes back. So trying to understand her, trying to figure out what to do to fix your computer, basically took a day and a half to get this little problem solved. Techno stress, little things. Technology is great when it works, but frequently it doesn't, and when it doesn't, that can add to stress in our lives. Occupational stress, we get into this with ergonomics class, work in industry. Job demands. Usually when the demands of the job exceed what you're capable of doing. The productivity demands are such that it's not possible to meet those demands. So you're always stressed. I can't seem to keep up. I'm not productive as much as they want me to be. Don't want to lose your job. Fear of job loss. Layoffs are coming. Everybody's really worried about that. You're working excessive hours, you're just getting worn down. Occupational stress, techno stress, probably the 2 of the bigger stresses these days people feel. Okay, so now we're going to get into the neurophysiology a little bit. This can get a little bit involved. So kind of try to stick with me here, see if we can break this down. 3 bigger picture, 3 primary systems that deal with stress. It's kind of a balance between these systems. It's quite a delicate balance. That can impact your health, as we'll see pretty quickly. There's the nervous system, there's the endocrine system, and then the immune system. Kind of like a domino effect. Definitely the immune system, stress impacts the immune system. Why do you get sick? Why do a lot of people get sick towards the end of the semester? The stress builds and builds and builds. You get worn down, you catch a cold, catch the flu, hopefully not COVID, but stress leads to suppressed immune system, you catch everything that's out there. Okay, so let's kind of look at the bigger picture of the brain. Just kind of review of the brain, the different systems of the brain, especially in relation to emotions. The bottom, the early brain, this is the vegetative level, everything just kind of goes automatic pilot. And then you work up into the limbic system, especially with the amygdala and the hippocampus. So you're kind of feeling all those emotions, I think of dogs, pets, or animals. They're kind of driven by this limbic system. They don't have the higher level stuff. So fear, basic emotions, fear and food probably. Dogs until a certain point where they don't feel this anymore. For them, it's probably initially fear, sex, and food, and then it's just because if they get fixed or whatever, then it's just fear and food. I mean, your dog is driven by fear and food. And little dogs, we have a little dog. He's always barking his head off, or very emotional, or hungry all the time. It's just that's kind of drives everything in the limbic system. And the neocortex, this is it can override everything, our ability to rationalize, process stuff on a higher level. Good example of this, we were talking last week about the marshmallow test. Those kids that don't do well with the marshmallow test, they can't wait. That little girl, the two girls that just ate the marshmallow right off the bat, they could not even wait. The one girl didn't even think about waiting. And then when they looked at these children years later, they found that the ones that waited, that had delayed gratification, had a higher level, more development in the frontal lobe. They were better at overriding those hot emotions of all that chocolate cake or all that drug or whatever it is, and thinking long-term versus short-term. So this section overrides this section. The cortex overrides the limbic. And then breaking it down further within the limbic system, this nervous system, central nervous system, kind of the way it works generally, kind of process the emotion, the threat, and then the endocrine system, the hormones are how you respond. Hypothalamus, right there, a little P-shaped thing. It's kind of the seat of the emotions. It's kind of the relay station, the amygdala. So the emotion is here. You feel that fear, and it goes to the hypothalamus, and the pituitary, down here, master gland, activated by the hypothalamus. So you feel the emotion, goes to the hypothalamus, goes to the pituitary, sends out a hormone. That's how we kind of respond. Hippocampus regulates memory, especially long-term memory. That's significant because repeated long-term stress, if you're always stressed, getting a lot of toxic stress in your life, I'm not talking about stress around an exam that kind of dissipates for the most part after the exam, but this long-term awful stress, you've lost a loved one, something that's really stressing you out. COVID, if there's one, depending on your risk to your family, whatever. It can shrink your memory. It can shrink your memory. So it affects your brain cells. It literally shrinks your brain cells. So stress, long-term stress, is toxic to the brain. Okay, the nervous system. As we know, there's these two branches of the nervous system, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic, and they kind of do opposite of each other. Sympathetic is you're getting all revved up, too stressed out, your pupils are dilated, you're secreting saliva, your heart rate goes up, your lungs expand, your intestinal secretions. It's all part of this immediate fight or flight kind of response. Parasympathetic does the opposite. Relaxes your eyes, your pupils, decreases the heart rate, your lungs, all that stuff. Calms you down. Sympathetic revs you up. Parasympathetic calms you down. Sympathetic, fight, flight, or freeze. Energy expense, stress activity. What do your pets do, your dog? When the UPS guy knocks on the door, they go into sympathetic. It's all this adrenaline and epinephrine, norepinephrine, rapid metabolic change, energy expenditure. You're ready to run or attack kind of thing. Automatic nervous system. This is the system we like as therapists and we like as human beings, that we need more of as human beings. We want to activate the parasympathetic nervous system to calm ourselves down, releasing the acetylcholine, allowing ourselves to regenerate, get back to that homeostasis that we want. Endocrine system. The endocrine system, the glands through their body that regulate metabolic function, pituitary, thyroid, adrenal glands. The thyroid gland, we're going to focus on that a little bit, secretes long-term impacting hormones, which increase metabolism. Also releases thyroxine, which increases blood pressure, heart rate, metabolic rate, depth of respiration, increased anxiety and tiredness. Thyroxine, not a good thing in terms of stress, and really can get us going in the wrong direction. The pituitary gland, influenced by the hypothalamus, remember it goes from the amygdala, hypothalamus, down to the pituitary gland, releasing these hormones. If you're stressed, it's going to release ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, commands the adrenal glands to secrete hormones such as vasopressin, it's called ADH, an antidiuretic hormone, which regulates blood volume and blood pressure, links to hypertension. If you're always stressed at your job or life and you have high blood pressure, this is why this pituitary gland is releasing too much of this ACTH and increases your blood pressure. Adrenal glands, these are called the stress gland, and believed to have the biggest impact on stress. You need to know about the adrenal glands. Definitely want to know about the adrenal glands. This is a number of hormones, including cortisol. It's a big stress hormone. Epinephrine and norepinephrine, fight or flight. Cortisol is the biggest one, probably of all these hormones that we're talking about. When scientists are trying to study the impact of stress on the body, what they do, one of the first things they do is they measure the amount of cortisol in your blood. And what's the average amount? Are you above that? You're really getting impacted by stress on your body. What does cortisol do? It stimulates glucose, sugar regeneration, liver, for immediate response. And that's good for that quick response, but bad for the long term. Associated with immune system suppression. Increases your cholesterol, suppresses physical growth, can actually make you stop growing, inhibits reproductive hormones, and affects areas of the brain functioning that control attention, memory, planning, and behavior. ADHD, usually there's not like a childhood trauma to it, but in cases where there is, it makes sense because you're getting that cortisol, that toxic stress, impacting your ability to for attention, to control attention appropriately. There's the little adrenals on top of the kidneys. So the top of each kidney, one is cone-shaped in appearance. The neuroendocrine pathways, if you're never going to look at this pathway, this HPA axis. Hypothalamus immediately activates the sympathetic nervous system for flight or flight, with some connection to the adrenals via the nerves. This is a pathway you need to know really well. Through the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, a message is sent from the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland, which releases ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, to activate the adrenals to release a flood of stress hormones for flight or flight via the bloodstream. So right down to that, take it down to the cortisol. I'll show you this in a second. So here it is right here. Here's the hypothalamus way up in the brain. Stress. I'm really stressed over the neuro exam. Boom. Hypothalamus releases CRH to the pituitary gland, which releases ACTH to the adrenal gland on top of the kidney. And what does the adrenal gland do? Releases cortisol. What does cortisol do? All those metabolic changes we talked about, along with increasing your cholesterol and decreasing your immune system. So this is kind of what's going on if you get sick at the end of the semester. Too much of this is being released in your body. The HPA axis is our central stress response system. It's an elegant, very dynamic, intertwining the central nervous system and the endocrine system. Kind of simplifying it, corticotropin releasing factor is released from the anterior hypothalamus. CRF in turn activates the release of ACTH from the pituitary gland. ACTH then activates the adrenal cortex to release cortisol and aldosterone, which increases metabolism, body fluids, blood pressure, blood glucose levels. That's a key thing, blood glucose levels, blood sugar levels. Why is that key? Because this affects individuals with diabetes. And you'll see a ton of patients with diabetes, they're getting stressed, or their body's getting stressed, so it's their blood sugar out of whack. It's a cyclical kind of pathway of problems. I saw a lot of diabetics that got sick. They got some kind of infection or something, or their bowels or whatever, some kind of stress, stroke, whatever it was. So their blood sugar is totally out of whack. led to all these other health issues. Stress impacts blood sugar levels. This is the axis. This is what we're going to do in class. You're going to have to fill this in. How it works. Homeostasis and illness. Difficulty returning to homeostasis, that's that balance that we all want, impacts the cardiovascular system, your heart, your digestive system, stomach problems, musculoskeletal system. You're awful tense in your muscles can lead to muscle pain. Your immune system, wear and tear through long-term stress sets the stage for disease and illness. Stress and illness are intertwined. How does stress affect your body? Cardiovascular. People who have had heart attacks, issues around that, they have to really decrease the stress in their lives, decrease the stress and strain on their heart. Cardiovascular increases heart rate, blood volume, pressure, constricts vessels, dilates vessels, increased the force of the contraction. Again, that fight or flight, increases blood glucose, fatty acids, cholesterol. Okay for the short term, long term, doing damage to your whole heart system. Gastrointestinal, decreased saliva, contraction of esophagus, increased stomach acid, change in peristalsis. Increased tension in muscles we talked about, perspiring more, decreased skin temp, immune system is weakened. Stress in the body. During stress, the body puts future-oriented processes in the body on hold, related to feeding, fighting infections, and certain types of learning, to get really revved up and going to attack that tiger or run from that tiger. Stress impacts the immune system, cardiovascular, nervous system, increases aging, goes after brain cells, increases inflammation, affects your mood, affects your muscle tone. Complex cascade of events associated with acute stress. Increased blood pressure, heart rate, vasodilation, blood glucose, fatty acid, clotting, neural activity to muscles, decreased gastric activity, increased perspiration. All these things we talked about that are happening. What are some particular illnesses that maybe not caused by stress, but exacerbated by stress? In some cases caused by stress. Definitely migraines and headaches. I think we've all kind of experienced that around stress. Irritable bowel syndrome, problems with your stomach, definitely related to stress. Ulcers. Ulcers are not caused by stress, but they are made worse by stress. Heart disease, temporomandibular joint dysfunction, pain in your jaw, grinding your teeth. Repetitive strain injuries, carpal tunnel, we'll look at this in ergonomics. A lot of problems that people have with work-related injuries are due to stress. We talked about getting the cold, influenza, all those immune-related disorders. Take-home message around stress. The stress response involves a cascade of stress hormones throughout the body. It involves both the nervous system and the endocrine system. Cortisol plays a huge role in the stress response. The strength of the stress hormone cocktail depends on the intensity and duration of stress. Repeated chronic stress shrinks the brain. Very, very toxic to the body. Okay, so that's the end of the